Hi, everybody. Where do I go? Like in the middle, I think it'd be good. Thank you, everybody, for being here. A little bit easier to rock up today than it was yesterday. So who here was here yesterday throughout the... That's what we like to see, true commitment to the cause. My name's Richard Muirhead, and I'm a partner at Fabric Ventures. And so I'm especially happy to see you all here. But also very happy to have Olivier here as our guest for a little fireside chat. I'm going to be, hopefully we're going to get fully carried away, and I'm going to be warned by somebody that we need to stop. There might be a chance for a couple of questions at the end, but Olivier has a fascinating story. I guess he definitely sort of falls into the kind of OG category in terms of the whole movement that we're participating in here. And I will ask him to kick off by telling his story of how that came about back last decade, I guess.
Last decade. Yeah. Thanks, Richard. Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah. I guess my interest in technology really started in high school. I went to a private boarding school in Vancouver, Canada, so I'm Canadian. And I guess I figured out that you could skip school by going and flying to technology conferences. So I kind of was finding different technology conferences to fly to, predominantly in the US, Silicon Valley. And I joined a group that I found actually on Twitter when I was 16 or 17 called Teens in Tech. And we met up kind of quarterly in Palo Alto or San Francisco and basically just started cold emailing founders of, I think at our first meetup we had Drew Houston from Dropbox. So that was at a time when you could just kind of reach out to founders. This was 2007, 2008, and they would show up. That network started with about 10 kids, grew to about 60, and all of the kind of core team of Teens in Tech went on to found companies like Pinterest, Kik, not the Kik that got subpoenaed by the SEC, another one that got acquired by Skype, and a bunch of other creatives. At one of these meetups, I met a programmer by the name of Ryan Dahl, who was the originator of Node.js. And me and, at the time, close friends started building and prototyping a gaming application to see what we could do with Node.js. And that eventually turned into a company, and that's kind of where my love of open source initiated. And we were actually quite fortunate with that company to exclusively sell the code base to a Chinese MMO company. And after that, I moved to London when I was 19 and set up Latent Capital, which is my personal investment fund that is primarily focused on quantum computing, financial technology, and life science biotech. And I guess from there, after getting bored of kind of a few seed investments where I was not as active, I said, what am I good at building on top of open source software? And I think around 2012, I came across Bitcoin and was here today.
So I've been hearing a lot. So obviously people in the room may be familiar with a leadership contest going on at the moment where people are trying to create backstories and to make up for their lack of front stories. But I think that's an inspirational path that Olivier has been on, and it led you to be involved in mining from 2012. So maybe you talk about how that kicked off, and where you the genesis of that, and then where you took that organization ultimately.
Yeah. So was basically started buying and selling various cryptocurrencies, investing in a bunch of different startups. A bunch of these people went missing. It was it was quite unique, crypto cowboys, and was always fascinated about the energy aspect, and being Canadian, a lot of Canadian entrepreneurs essentially use the Toronto Stock Exchange as their form of venture capital. So it's quite common for people to say, I'm a CEO of a gold mining company or a lithium or diverse base of hard rock assets. And that's primarily what Canadians are known for, developing and building the biggest gold mining, silver, copper mining companies. So we started kind of various smaller mining operations, and I think it was about 3 years ago, I was in Shanghai at the time for Ethereum Developer Conference 2, and me and a good friend and business partner, Marco Strang, who's the founder of Genesis Mining, which is the largest hash power provider in the world, saw an interesting transaction that happened on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. So essentially, it was an energy company trying to acquire a Bitcoin mine via a reverse takeover. We thought that was extremely interesting. We flew to Shenzhen and see if we could replicate something. Unfortunately, that got blocked by the regulators. But then I started brainstorming and say, well, you know, I'm Canadian, why don't we bring this to the Canadian capital markets? And that's kind of the genesis of Hive, which was the first publicly listed crypto company.
Can you give us an idea of the kind of scale of operations, and maybe a lot of people speculate about the question of profitability.
Sure.
And then as prices go up and down, is it sustainable economically?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very competitive ecosystem. We operate, at least with Hive, facilities in Iceland and Sweden, and are developing one in Norway. All of the mines are geothermal and hydro. And I mean, it's extremely volatile landscape. So for instance, Sweden, we spent, I think, around $65 million developing that facility. And it was the hottest summer ever in Sweden, which is not good for mining. But now the prices have dropped in, and you can do, leveraged arbitrage on the energy price infrastructure. So there's a lot of kind of trading strategies involved within the energy price, the coins. But for the last 6 to 8 months, it was unprofitable. Mm-hmm. Now it's profitable, and I think, within regards to Bitcoin, most miners kind of are, break even around 3,000 USD of BTC.
Got it. And obviously you're operating in multiple jurisdictions.
Sure.
For climate reasons, as
Sure.
well as being perhaps attracted by some of the governments. What is the government perspective on these mining operations and crypto in general? What
Sure.
activity have you seen?
Well, I think it's extremely interesting. Some governments are very supportive because they see it bringing jobs. We were in kind of long negotiations with Hydro-Quebec, which is a province in Canada, and they're kind of government-based hydroelectricity provider. So I think it has the most surplus hydro capacity in the world. They were extremely bullish on letting us set up kind of a 100 megawatt facility. And then, I think I won't name the name, but one of the Chinese mining operators, I think, shipped 100,000 miners to the port of Montreal without any permission. And the government was kind of like, what's going on here? So that completely stopped.
Not a good idea to do that in the US, I don't think.
No, trade war. But that completely stopped our negotiations. So there's a bunch of different players that you have to kind of ascertain what their mandates are. And it's negotiation, but ultimately you want to be geographically diversified, because you never know what can happen.
Indeed. So are any of them getting involved directly in
governments?
Yeah.
I do think several nation states are mining cryptocurrency for sure.
Why would that be, from your perspective?
To have a voting right if Bitcoin were to, overtake fiat issued currencies, mm-hmm. They want to have control over them. So,
is that good for Bitcoin, or?
Well, it's more hash power, more money securitizes the chain. So ultimately, yes. Yeah.
Got it. Very good. And so, I mean, the question is often asked about it from an environmental perspective, and you've kind of touched upon this sort of tangentially
Sure.
already. What's the impact? Where does this go as we kind of evolve to new forms of from proof of work,
consensus,
proof of stake, and so forth?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's been several studies put out where it's like 70 or 80% of the crypto mining capacity is green energy, mm-hmm. and there's a shitload of renewable energy out there that is not being used. Mm-hmm. So for my perspective is for that to be used to secure blockchain applications is a good use case for the world. And I think, speaking with Chinese friends, the government is pretty close to shutting down I'm supposed to have a meeting later today with a state-owned enterprise that wants to move their mining equipment out of China. So I think that's coming to an end.
Okay.
And a large portion of the mining that was associated with coal mining was in China. So
Got it.
I think that's coming
the
to a
ratio
conclusion.
will improve.
And a lot of the sites we're looking at right now, LNG sites. So I'm not an oil expert by any means, but there is some sort of extract energy that comes out. So actually, if you set up a portable container with a Bitcoin mine on these LNG sites, it actually reduces the carbon emissions by 70%.
Great. Yeah, I hadn't really, we were talking about it before, I hadn't sort of got my head around the fact that you can have pockets of energy that are kind of trapped
Sure.
in different nation states.
So that's, that's when you're starting to see these distributed mining, systems and container boxes that are extremely cheap, efficient to set up, and also capable to move to stranded energy. And you don't need that much of an internet connection to mine, so it's quite efficient.
So we had a couple of people talking about staking just now, which is
Sure.
can also be sort of termed a shift to generalized mining.
Yep.
What's your perspective on that?
I think it's very early, and we've definitely been in touch with, just because we have one of the larger GPU mining farms in the world, in touch with several of these new coins or protocols that are coming out, and kind of testing, fine-tuning them. But I think there's room for multiple consensus algorithms, and it seems like it will be a portion of the blockchain future, for sure.
And when you did your listing, that was a kind of first opportunity to convince, with the most basic of kind of essentially credit products, for people to believe in you, believe in
Sure.
Bitcoin and in your venture, and for
Well, yeah, I
some money.
think a portion of me pushed public listing just because I got tired of people calling me on how to buy Ethereum. So just buy my stock, and that's still true today. No institutions, and I meet with institutions all the time, they can't set up a crypto wallet, manage keys, and buy coins. So I think we're going to start seeing more institutional products listed on traditional exchanges as a bridge, and those kind of mechanisms. So another company I started, Catena, is setting up exchange-traded notes that are going to be listed in Stockholm, Stuttgart, and Bern Stock Exchange. And Johan's responsible for founding XBT Provider, which is kind of the largest synthetic crypto product. And I think its AUM went to $2.5 billion. But clearly Hive was well received. I think within 3 months, we had a $2 billion market capitalization upon listing. We started at a $40 million. That was our seed round, was at 40. And within 90 trading days, we raised $200 million.
That sounds like good progress.
Fidelity is our largest shareholder, institutional shareholder. So,
Fantastic. And so where do you see this evolving? Are you going to move beyond Hive?
Yeah, so I think Hive was my kind of first idea of what, because a lot of the mining companies were just basically investing on a one-to-one capital basis. No banks would lend to crypto miners, so with Hive at least we got a multiple on our cash flow. And I think we trade at like 40x cash flow right now. So it's a nice multiple to be able to raise. And our last financing was, I think, $115 million at a $1 billion valuation. So that at least gives you a leverage cost basis to raise money at. But looking and having advisors and some of the people I founded Hive with, very experienced Canadian hard rock mining entrepreneurs who've built multi-billion-dollar gold companies, looking at all of those instruments that have financed those companies and bringing them to the cryptographic mining world is something I'll be pursuing, and most likely on public exchanges.
Got it. Staying in Canada?
I think we'll look more international. I think I'd love to stay in Canada. I'm Canadian, and after we listed Hive, there was a slew of other entrepreneurs like Mike Novogratz who also followed suit. With other listings, there's tons of capital in Canada. I think people forget it's the second largest financial hub in North America after New York. Third is Chicago. But yeah, I think being a public company operating in Canada, there's been a lot of struggles with the auditing procedures, and potentially that was associated with the Quadriga hack and someone going missing in India, and that didn't help things.
No.
But the Canadian Auditing Board, it's been difficult learning experience.
So
or educational experience for them, but
so
I think
opportunity for Europe, perhaps.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm
Good.
based in Europe, so
Yeah.
it makes sense.
So changing tack just a little bit, as you mentioned, I know that you've actually been investing in the whole field of quantum.
Sure.
And some people get alarmed by the concept that maybe quantum computing could undermine the very building blocks of crypto. What's your view on that? If you've got a perspective
Well, I
on
mean,
both sides.
yeah, cryptographers are like, academics that's very contentious when you talk about protocols and things of that nature. I got interested in quantum computing. My uncle, who's based in Vancouver, he runs a venture capital firm and was the first investor in D-Wave Systems, which is, they're building these large black boxes. So he actually invested, I think, 17 years ago when it was just kind of an IP company. 5 years later, they decided to start building these crazy black boxes. So I was kind of exposed to that, and there's a big, quantum community within Canada. There's University of Waterloo, University of British Columbia. Mike Lazardis, the founder of BlackBerry, is, dedicated kind of his life now to quantum computing. And I actually met a team at the University of Cambridge, and it's the company's called ZY4, but it's developing quantum invulnerable encryption. And a lot of people are, why would you do this? We're not going to have it for 10 years. Well, the fact is, it takes large enterprises, governments, 10 years to switch from RSA to a new encryption protocol. And it's not just about the security, but when you look at how efficient blockchains are, we've done a lot of exploratory work about actually having quantum physics inherent within the consensus algorithms of how blockchains operate. So it's more than that, yeah.
And so maybe for the audience, given you're involved directly, to give a feeling for, it's going to take 10 years for quantum to impact crypto.
Sure.
Quantum in general, what are the kind of early applications that people have talked to you about? Where do you think we are on the timeline?
So I think quantum encryption from like a capitalistic perspective is like, when venture capitalists look at the space, they're going to say, oh, people are going to spend money on this. But I think there's quantum sensing, quantum chemistry, quantum simulation, and all of these things. I think it'll take some time. There's lots of companies that are kind of operating like the consultancy angle, where it's like just charge Fortune 500 companies as much money as they can to optimize flight trajectories with some fancy computer or something. But I think, the reality is the Chinese are outspending the US right now 100 to 1, and that's what they're disclosing. So it's maybe 10,000 to 1. So I think it'll be an extremely interesting, especially with all these trade wars and stuff, geopolitical, the quantum in a geopolitical, context will be extremely interesting to see.
Never mind 5G,
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the conversations that I've seen from quantum encryption is how do they embed them within 5G systems and all of that stuff. So SK Telecom in Korea has been working aggressively on that with a company in Switzerland called ID Quantique. So yeah,
super.
Cool
You think in terms of the way you began, you didn't sit on your sofa. You created, I think, a lot of your own good fortune.
Sure.
If you were giving advice, actually, we don't have a super young audience today, but maybe we have super young people on the live
It's never
stream.
too late.
And it's never too late. If you were giving your thoughts on how to get going in this space, and then perhaps some thoughts about which part of the Web3 landscape in general still has opportunities. What your sort of closing thoughts on that?
I think you need to. I think it's easy to sit behind a computer screen, and I'm as guilty as anyone. Especially when you're involved in all these operational tasks and managing a bunch of people and companies. But yeah, it's extremely important to get out there, socialize, because I think 9 out of the 10 biggest deals I've ever done just happen randomly at a bar.
So the advice is go to a bar.
or going to a meeting and you don't feel like it,
Yeah.
and then you find the purpose of that meeting. You actually just, go down another tangent and do another deal. It always happens.
There
like
is
that.
a truth in that sometimes it is somehow the meetings you're least keen to go to tend not to be great. There's some element of that, I think, also in venture capital, the kind of the products and the opportunities and the teams who are kind of seem the most out there. Are quite often exactly the ones you'd be working with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's very good. Well, thank you very much for sharing
Thanks.
that. And I know you're in and out and around. You might be able to go. I think you've got a call now, but later on,
I'll be
catch up with people if they want to speak to you. Thanks very much, Olivier.
Cool.